I have a very unique perspective when it comes to playing Call of Duty Warzone on mouse and keyboard, and that's because I'm one of the few people in the entire world that has been able to drop 30+ kill games on both inputs, controller and mouse and keyboard. Because of this, I think I have a better understanding of the strengths and weaknesses of each input, and in this video I'm going to highlight several things that you can do as a mouse and keyboard player to improve your aim, put yourself in situations that you have an advantage over controller players, and ultimately just become a better player. This video will be broken down into 3 main sections: settings, gameplay specific tips, and finally aim training. Starting with settings, which is the foundation of your game and what arguably is the most important setting, your sensitivity. A lot of people have a misunderstanding of it actually, so let's explain. There's 2 main components that make up your sense for mouse and keyboard. DPI, or dots per inch, is like the sensitivity from your mouse to the PC itself. That is then multiplied with your game sensitivity to get your effective DPI, or eDPI. Is there a best DPI though? Well, some testing has shown that DPIs greater than 1600 result in less latency or less lag from the mouse to the PC. So basically, I recommend playing at a DPI of 1600 or higher. You can change this through the software associated with your mouse brand or by hitting the DPI button on your mouse if you have one. If you're on console, you might need to plug your mouse into a laptop or computer to change this. Now let's say you go from 800 to 1600 DPI. This means you need to cut your game sensitivity in half for your sensitivity to feel the same. eDPI can further be converted into centimeters per 360, which simply means how many centimeters you have to move your mouse in one direction to turn 360 degrees in game. You can find yours at mouse-sensitivity.com if you're interested. Now the golden question, is there a best mouse sensitivity? Well, let's look at a few of the best mouse and keyboard players and see what they play at. When we look at the average centimeter per 360 of these players, the average is about 38 centimeters. For the majority of players, I believe about 30 to 40 centimeters is the Goldilocks zone for best sensitivity in Warzone. I actually have the lowest sensitivity on this list. I've just always played at a very low sense, and I've developed the arm mechanics to be comfortable here. If you had me copy someone like Metaphor's sense, I would really struggle because I'm just not used to that level of sensitivity. A common issue I see with Warzone players is ridiculously fast sensitivities, like less than 10 centimeters per 360. This fast of a sense just does not allow enough precision for consistent tracking. If you play at an extremely high sensitivity and you're wanting to get better, I would highly consider trying to get closer to about 20 centimeters per 360. But if you already have great aim, no matter what your sense is, do what works best for you. Now, if you're thinking about changing your sense, I don't recommend making a massive jump. In general, you shouldn't change by more than 25% of your sense, and you need to give yourself several days to weeks to get used to it before you change again. I'll talk about some other methods to help find your sense later in the video, but to be clear, there is no best sensitivity. Everyone is unique based on body mechanics, the size and position of your desk, and more. The vast majority of the best keyboard players keep their ADS sensitivity at 1, meaning it's the same sensitivity as when they aim down sight versus when they hip fire. Overall, this is what I recommend because it keeps things 1-to-1 and is ideal for muscle memory. If you do change your ADS sense multiplier other from 1, I'd recommend matching that to your tack stance if you use tack stance at all. That way that feels like the same sense of when you ADS. Also, for the transition timing, I recommend instant because the moment you hit your right click to ADS, if you change your ADS sense, it's going to instantly go to that. But if you're on 1 like me, it doesn't matter which setting you're on essentially. ADS sense focus allows you to change your sense when you hold your breath with a sniper, and you could turn this down slightly, but again, keeping at 1-to-1 is probably best. ADS sensitivity type is a confusing one, but let me oversimplify it. Most people play on relative because when you aim down sight, relative will adjust your sensitivity by slowing it down slightly to match your new field of view. Since all guns, even iron sights, zoom in your FOV just slightly even if you play affected. Legacy will feel faster when you aim down sight because it does not adjust for your new field of view. If you're unsure, I'd recommend relative. Monitor distance coefficient is also a bit confusing. The correct value is calculated by taking the horizontal resolution of your monitor divided by your vertical resolution. So if you play on a standard 16:9 1920x1080 monitor, 1920 divided by 1080 is 1.78. The default is 1.33 for some reason, and a lot of people just leave it on 1.33 because it's what they're used to. But 1.33 1.78 is technically the correct number. Only if you play on an ultra wide monitor would this number be something else. If you've been on 1.33 forever, nothing wrong with leaving it alone, but I'd probably say you're best to switch to 1.78. And if you switch, wide angle flicks and tracking might feel slightly different at first until you get used to it. Those are by far the most important settings when it comes to your mouse sensitivity, but to quickly cover the rest here, you can set custom zooms or custom sense per zoom. Again, I don't recommend this because I think it's bad for that muscle memory purpose, but if there's a particular scope that you feel like is off, you could adjust it in here if you wanted to. If you are someone that is used to that like airplane style of aim where up is down and down is up, you can flip that to inverted here if you so prefer doing so. Third person ADS correction type is basically not important. It is only going to affect you if you play zombies here. To be completely honest, I'm not 100% sure what this setting does, as it just doesn't apply really to Warzone here. Mouse calibration is an interesting one. I have heard some people talk about changing like their filtering just up in their acceleration. Overall, if you change any of these settings, it is going to be very hard for muscle memory purposes of making flicks and things like that. And I highly recommend leaving all of this off or at 0. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on keybinds because I have some extremely abnormal keybinds and there is no best keybinds. They work great for me and I feel like the placements of them are very optimal, but they're just not standard for most video games. It's just habits that I developed from playing other games over time. One thing I do recommend is make sure that you have dedicated buttons for your prone and dive and your crouch and slide. This way you can have independent slide and dive behavior because this will make slide canceling much smoother. I'll quickly scroll through the rest of this. Feel free to pause on any of this as you see fit here. One other thing I do want to quickly point out here is near the bottom here, I recommend having your ping on something that is very easy to hit. I use Q, and the reason for that is I'm very easily able to live ping people while I'm shooting at them. This is very useful in dark areas because you can hit that live ping and just try to track the ping when it's hard to see someone, since we don't have aim assist to kind of rely on helping us track in poorly lit areas. Going into gameplay settings, the first thing I want to touch on is automatic sprint. With movement being a major outplay system again in Warzone, I prefer playing on automatic tactical sprint, which allows me to instantly get into my fastest movement speed by just pressing W. However, I also feel that there's nothing wrong with leaving this off or on just auto sprint if you set your tactical sprint behavior to single tap run, which means pressing your sprint keybind once will take you straight into tactical sprint. This gives you more control, but you might sacrifice just a tad bit of movement for this if you're not using automatic tactical sprint. Slide maintain sprint is a newer setting that does exactly what it says. If you use auto sprint or tac sprint, you will keep sprinting after you slide and you don't have to press sprint again. So I recommend just leaving it on. Scrolling down to the mantling options, I've found that turning all of these off will get rid of any accidental mantles or climbing over things that you don't want to, especially when you're in the middle of a gunfight. However, it can make going through windows a bit finicky, although everyone is having that issue, and hopefully it's something they address soon because it seems like the windows are about an inch too small for your player. Like I mentioned in the keybind section, I keep my slide and dive behavior as independent, which means I have separate keybinds for sliding and diving. I recommend this highly because it actually makes your slides much more responsive if you do this. And it's one of the big advantages of keyboard and mouse players over controller, because when I play controller, I have dive turned off so that my slides are better. I can't dive on controller because I can't bind it to another button like I can on keyboard and mouse. We'll quickly cover the rest of the gameplay settings here. I do recommend turning your auto deploy off. That way you can get lower to the ground unless you're really bad about sliding into the ground. Looking at the advanced settings here, the only one I have changed here is the ledge climb behavior to movement based. That way if I'm pressing W, my guy will automatically mantle over instead of having to hit jump again. I just find it being a little bit easier. Definitely recommend sprinting door bash on so you can sprint and open closed doors. Scrolling down to the combat behaviors here, focus behavior is completely up to you whether or not you want to toggle to hold your breath or hold it. I use toggle, but completely personal preference. Equipment behavior, whether you want to hold or toggle to bring that grenade out and hold to let go or toggle to throw it again. Again, it's personal preference there. Weapon mounting, I use toggle. This is again for the tac stance activation, how you get into it, whatever works best for you here. I like ADS plus melee. Definitely recommend turning your armor plate behavior to apply all. It's going to make plating much easier, faster, and more consistent there. Combat advanced behaviors, I'll show that briefly here. Weapon mount exit delay. If you turn this to short, it makes it easier to get unmounted there. I also like sprint cancels reload there as a setting, although that isn't as important since we're able to sprint and reload. I don't actually think that technically applies to Warzone anymore. Vehicle look behaviors here, and then kind of finally here at the end with the overlay behaviors. Now there is one config file that I want to show you guys here. Open up your documents. So click on documents, go to Call of Duty, go to players, and then options.4.cod23. It should be your first one. Double click to open that. If you get a prompt that says, how do you want to open this? Just select a notepad. Now, obviously, if you are on console playing mouse and keyboard, number one, kudos to you. Number two, you can't do this, so I apologize. Hit Control F and type in raw, R-A-W. The game hates me. Okay, for some reason, I had to hit down for direction. But anyways, once you find it, it's gonna be this right here. Use raw mouse input. You guys are going to be on true. I really recommend you change this to false. I can't explain exactly what this does, but several weeks, maybe months ago by now, Metaphor put out a video and explained that he changed this, and this was like a night and day difference for me. It just felt like my sensitivity was more what I used to be like it was back in Warzone 1, because ever since MW2, MW3, the mouse sensitivity has not felt quite right. When I put this to false, it felt more like Warzone 1. So give it a try. If you hate it, go back, but man, this was a game changer for me. When you're done here, just make sure you hit file and then save. So let's finally get into gameplay specific tips to give you a better chance of winning as a mouse and keyboard player. The first one actually has to do with breaking aim assist. There's two main problem areas that cause controller players to lose aim assist. When controller players aim through railings, stairways, fences, bushes, or trees, they almost always lose aim assist, and the feeling of having it one moment to then losing it can be very jarring, and usually your aim sucks when this happens. The same effect can also be accomplished with smoke grenades. Whenever controller players aim through smoke, they typically lose all aim assist. So I recommend running smoke grenades to push up on players with, or try to shoot from the edge of the smoke. So basically what I'm saying is, if you ever have an opportunity to fight around or through one of those surfaces I just mentioned, make sure you do that, because a controller player is going to have crap aim when they do, and to you, it doesn't matter. As a mouse and keyboard player, what type of fights do you feel most uncomfortable with? For me and most people, it's very close range fights, especially where the enemy is moving very quickly across your screen. However, when I play controller, that's actually my strongest area. The reason for this is because we don't have rotational aim assist that can literally pull your aim around like controller does. So when I'm playing on mouse and keyboard, I try to keep my distance much more. Doesn't mean I'm afraid to push anyone, but instead of trying to get to a point blank range fight, I'm looking to start the engagement around 10 meters or so if possible. There are several ways to try and do this, but one thing is to find cover to work off of and try to bait your enemy to push you. Act like you're going to push, maybe fire some fake shots at them and get them to expose themselves in the open. Generally, when I play on mouse and key, I tend to play a bit smarter and slightly more passive, because I know I have to rely on my smarts and I can't expect to hit 100% of my shots at close range compared to when I'm on controller. Building your loadouts is also very different on mouse and key compared to how I would do it on controller. Number one, I almost always prioritize having a sight, because having that clear picture of what I'm shooting at is almost always more important than having that extra attachment for maybe better movement speed or even less recoil, since I don't have that aim assist to rely on to help kind of center my aim and get it really on target. You should also focus on horizontal recoil attachments. The Bruin Heavy Support is a perfect example of this, because it really helps at horizontal versus a vertical. With aim assist, that horizontal is minimized because it kind of helps glue it to the target here. So for example, when I run the TAC Eradicator on controller, I run the Kimura vertical, which gives me vertical recoil control. But on mouse and key, I almost always go with the Bruin Heavy Support grip. Another thing about the Bruin Heavy is that it also gives you a lot of aiming idle sway bonus and also firing aim stability. This is another set of attributes that I really look to try to maximize when playing mouse and keyboard, because the extra aiming idle sway is actually one of the huge culprits to why aim has never felt good on MW2 and MW3 compared to how it did back in Warzone 1. If you feel like you really struggle at close range range fights, consider running a tack stance build like this striker or a max hip fire build. They tend to be a little bit more forgiving up close compared to when you're just aiming down sight, and they're also just a lot of fun in general to run. And finally, make sure you're prioritizing guns that have manageable recoil over what kills the fastest. You probably see every single player running the WSP Swarm. Yeah, it's really good, but it has a tough recoil pattern even for an SMG at close range. And just because you saw Biffle or Aiden drop an insane gameplay with it doesn't mean you're gonna do the same on mouse and keyboard. So switch for lower recoil guns, like instead of the Swarm, the Striker or the WSP9 perhaps. Currently, there's two main strengths of mouse and keyboard players over controller. Number one, the ability to dive. This is very useful to make jumps you couldn't make otherwise, or so you can dive quickly behind cover, especially on diving across the Vondel rooftops. Very, very useful and one of my favorite things about mouse and keyboard. Second, the ability to hit wide angle flicks. Unless you play on a super high controller sensitivity, controller players just don't have the ability to change the directions as fast as keyboard and mouse players do. So once you aim train more and get better, hitting these nasty flicks is one of your strengths if you can do it consistently. At the end of the day, if you want to get better on mouse and keyboard and compete in an aim assist dominated game, you have to put time and practice in. There's several ways to do this. You could just play a lot. People like Huskers and Metaphor are great examples of this. They've been playing for years and their experience has helped develop extremely accurate aim. But there's another way to get much more practice and reps in with less time, and that's aim training through games like Aim Lab or Kovacs. Unfortunately, you can't do this on console as this is only available on Steam as far as I know, but I will show you guys some other methods later. Generally, I recommend Aim Lab because it's free and Kovacs isn't, although both are very similar and great aim trainers, whichever you prefer to use. I'm not going to spend a ton of time here going over settings as there's plenty of other YouTube videos out there if you want to adjust things like your graphics and visuals and crosshair, but briefly in the controls settings tab, obviously make sure you have Call of Duty selected. You're going to input your sensitivity as whatever it is in game. Field of view is an interesting one and I need to touch on this here. A lot of the scenarios that you're going to train in here don't allow you to have the ability to aim down sight. So for that, overall, I recommend just playing at 103. It's kind of a weird number, but it's kind of the number that has been set amongst different kind of aim training guides and gurus out there. That's just kind of your standard go-to. And I promise you, it's not going to mess things up, even if you play at 120 or 115 FOV in game. Now, if you do find a setting that allows you to aim down sight, you can turn this up to whatever it is in game you play at. So I play at 120, and then you can select the type of gun you want to practice, and the zoom level should be appropriate to what it is. And then just make sure you have all of your other settings in there accordingly. So again, make sure you have like your ADS field of view, your relative or legacy, your monitor distance coefficient, all those other things. Make sure your DPI is set the same, which is, they call it CPI here, and so on. So there are tons of different scenarios you can train on Aim Lab, and generally for Warzone, you're gonna wanna focus on tracking scenarios. Now, to make things easier, I actually have made my own custom playlist for you guys here. You can see all the scenarios listed right here. However, you should also be able to simply search TCaptainX Warzone playlist here. Let me move my camera over so you can see it. If you search that here, down in the bar down here, and we'll just double check to make sure it's working for you guys. We're gonna type that in, go to the playlist tab up there, and it's not showing, LOL. Okay, for some reason it worked when I only typed in TCaptainX on the home screen, and again, I would click the playlist. It might be a little buggy, so if you have to, you could make your own playlist the same as mine. So it is laid out in a particular order where it starts with smooth tracking scenarios first, and then progresses to more reactive tracking next. This is the foundation of what your aim training should be if you're looking to get better at Warzone. It then has one switching scenario, which again focuses on smooth tracking, has two flicking or precision clicking scenarios, and finally two dynamic clicking scenarios, which is clicking but with moving targets. The last four scenarios are definitely important, especially if you like sniping, but trust me, you're gonna wanna spend most of your time on the first 7 scenarios here. Now, of course, feel free to experiment with others. A lot of these I got from Strafe's Warzone playlist that you can search and play on Aim Lab as well. Generally, I try to aim train for about 15 to 20 minutes, 5 days a week. Consistency is huge here. A lot of people want to know some secret setting or method to instantly get better. There isn't one. Just like anything in life, if you want to get better at it, you have to put in the work. The reason why you look at streamers and wonder how their aim is so much better than yours is simple. They play the game a lot and have dedicated way more time to improving at it than you have. It's the same way that Steph Curry makes three-pointers look easy while I struggle to even make free throws. I don't practice basketball, so I can't expect to be good at it. So if you want to get better, aim train consistently and stop making excuses. So outside of aim training, I do a specific in-game warm-up, and that is through a private match in MW3 multiplayer. And if you're a console player and you're unable to do aim lab, aim training, this is going to be your main source of aim training instead. So in here, go to your game setup here, change the mode to free-for-all for the map. This depends on what you're going to want to work on, but for most of you guys, you probably want to focus on close quarters fights. So I would recommend going to something like shipment for this here. For the rules, turn the time limit and score limit up to however you see fit here. You can set a limit or just go really, really high and do whatever. Match start time can come down. The max health, turn this all the way to 300 and turn the health regen to fast. Over in the team tab here, the only thing you may want to adjust is the radar always on. You can turn that so you can know where people are, but that is completely optional here. Spawn ammo mags, make sure this is on max. Health steal, turn this to on. This will create kind of like a health siphoning effect here. It basically makes the time to kill longer and forces you to track your opponents more. And then finally, I'd recommend turning your kill streaks off as well. Before you start up, make sure you set the bots here. So crank this up to the max amount here, and I'll move my camera so you can see this briefly. I've got it just set on recruit. I honestly recommend just leaving it here, but you can turn this higher if you want to. As far as your loadout goes, just use whatever 2 SMGs you're most likely to use in game here. As far as your perks, not a big deal. I do like to run the tactical pads though. That way the slide canceling is the same as it is in Warzone here. I'll quickly show you some of my 2 favorite loadouts. This is my WSP9 here. And excuse me, this is my Striker 45 build that is very low recoil and easy to use. So from here, this is rather simple. If I'm getting on to warm up, normally I will just kill about 50 bots or so before I jump on here. And if you're looking to do this as more of an aim training, then I would try to kill more here. Obviously, you can also practice simple things like working on slide canceling and throwing knives, whatever it is you want to work on, but it's pretty simple. The more bots you kill, the more you practice your movement, the more you should see success. Now, the other thing I will say to take this to the next level is have your friends join on you. You can leave the bots on or just 1v1 or 1v1v1v1, however, against your friends. And that is probably the one thing that you will see the most benefit from, because you'll be going against other players that actually shoot back and have good movement as well, assuming your friends are decent at the game as well. Before we conclude, I do want to comment on my opinion of the 2 inputs. Which is better, controller or mouse and keyboard? I like to base things off objective measures and not subjective emotional feelings. And here's my best piece of data I can provide you. At the World Series of Warzone, of the 150 players who qualified, only 8 played on mouse and keyboard. Is it possible to compete at an extremely high level on mouse and keyboard in Warzone? Yes, it's just way freaking harder than controller. If the only thing you care about is how many kills and wins you get, I would just play controller. If I was playing in a tournament, I'm 1000% playing on controller. But if you're like me and you genuinely just enjoy playing mouse and keyboard and enjoy the challenge it presents, stop complaining, lock it in, and get to work. I hope this video was helpful, and if it was, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more Warzone content. Now go aim train!